Thanks for joining us for BC Rugby's virtual referee development session, The Dual Perspective, seeing both sides of the game with player referees Chloe Hill-Huse, James Kelly, and Paul Kelly. This will be a rather unique view of the game from three panelists who are current players and regular referees. Our panelists will be taking us through just how they expanded their involvement in the game, as well as understanding key areas of the game from both the player and the referee perspective, particularly the breakdown. And finally, we'll look at the tools and human resources available in the rugby community. Our first panelist is Chloe Hill-Huse out of Victoria, BC, who has represented Canada very recently at the under 18 level at hooker, and as well, pretty impressive for a lot of front row players, but Chloe's a new age of front row player, as is James, but represented BC Sevens and 15s, and recently won the Vancouver Sevens Invitational, beating the Ontario provincial team and the Rugby Canada Development Academy. And I know that was a pretty cool feather in the cap. As a referee, has been involved in Women's Division 1 as a referee at a pretty young age. So that's pretty impressive in its own right. And several games on the touchline in the Premier League as the assistant referee. James Kelly, also a hooker, represented BC most recently in the Best of the West series. Unfortunately, broke his hand and missed out on representing BC against Canada in their final Rugby World Cup 2019 preparation match. Plays his rugby on the weekends at Burnaby Lake, and as a referee, refereed Division 1. Actually got to referee his brother in Division 1, which is pretty fun, as a referee, as well as serving as assistant referee most recently in the World News Cup between UBC and Cal Berkeley, and of course two-time referee at the Western Canadian Championships in Kelowna both years. And last but not least, Paul Kelly. Paul is a player, longtime captain of the Surrey Beavers now in BC's Division 1, and has the versatile role as flanker and center. And we see him covering at fullback and doing it all for the Beavers on a given weekend. And as a referee, refereed up to BC Division 2, and game has been on the touchline as well in the Premier League, and has traveled to Winnipeg, Manitoba in the Western Canadian Championships as a referee a couple of seasons ago as well. To kick us off, how and when did you get involved in refereeing for the first time?
I was part of the Brittany Waters Girls Academy, which happened at UVic. And it's an academy that lasts a few weeks, or maybe 8 weeks. And through the academy, we did a refereeing course, and you got your refereeing certificate at the end of it. So I kind of did it, not accidentally, but I did it through an academy. And at the time, I was at GNS in grade 10, and somehow they heard that I had my refereeing certificate for rugby, and they were like, hey, would you be interested in refereeing some middle school games? And I said, sure, why not? So I started refereeing some middle school games for GNS, and I just fell in love. I loved it. It just was so cool to have that perspective of the game. So from there, I met with Kevin Smith, and he got me onto ARing some Prems games and Prem Reserves games, and now I'm here. So that's kind of my story, and I loved it.
Well, that's awesome, and that's quite a cool place to start as well. And you're referring to GNS, Glen Lyon Norfolk School, in Oak Bay, which has a really small student population, but punch above their weight in rugby for sure. Awesome, thanks so much, Chloe. Paul, over to you.
I just graduated high school, and I began my coaching career in high school. And of course, if anybody knows high school rugby, there's always a shortage of players and referees. So out of a necessity, I I took my first referee level 1 course back in 2009, and I just started through I was coaching grade 8, and I started refereeing junior rugby. So about for 4 or 5 years, I just tried to figure it out that way. And then in about 2015, I decided to get recertified, and I challenged myself to start doing games on the weekend. So that was getting involved in junior club rugby, and then doing Division 3 games potentially on Saturdays. So that all started in 2015 when I really started trying to get engaged in the senior men's and senior women's side of refereeing.
So it didn't happen overnight. That's
No.
cool, and we'll touch a bit more on just all the hats you have worn in rugby, for club and for region, and now for province. As for those who don't know, Paul is sitting on the competitions committee. So I'll share his email for complaints a little bit later. No, just kidding. Thanks, Paul. It's a job that refereeing is often a job that people struggle to get involved in initially. And sitting on a committee, I would say, is probably tops that. So thanks for sharing, Paul. James, over to you. Why did you start refereeing, and when?
Well, why? I actually I was coaching along with my brother just out of high school in 2009, and for years I was always the coach along with Paul, but Paul would be on the field reffing the games for the most part, because we'd always struggle to find referees, because obviously we all know there's always a shortage for high school games. And then around 2015, I think 2014 was our final year of coaching high school, and that's when I kind of decided, you know what, I don't mind. I saw Paul was making all right cash doing the high school games, and then he joined the referee society, I believe, in 2015. And at that point, I was playing actually for the Surrey Beavers, and I was the captain. And we just both kind of agreed the more refs our club had, the better conversations we could have with referees during games, me being a captain, Paul being a captain. And it's just changing the culture at our club, which wasn't at most the best of times, always a referee happy environment. So 2015, I got my level 1, and then 2016, I think it was, or 2017, we did our level 2 course. And yeah, since then it's really opened the door and opened my eyes as a player, and just really enjoyed it. And I feel like every year I'm progressing a lot better. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really neat perspective as well, James, that you touched on, which was, we often hear of clubs or schools kind of in a remedial way, almost forcing people to go through referee training, and in many parts of Canada and around the world, that's been a progressive remedy for players that have been, sanctioned for dissent, etc. But I really enjoy how the conversation within your club in Surrey, in the Fraser Valley here, I like how that expanded, not just doing a course for the sake of doing it, but let's actually get involved and be seen to be refereeing. That's a really powerful, aspect of any club, but not just to have certification, but to actually be seen in the community and put the money where the mouth is, so to speak. So yeah, great initiative for you, Paul and James, and also for your club. And we'll just move on to something a little bit more individualized for each of you, if that's okay. We'll start with you, Chloe. And again, Chloe, given that you played under 18, not that long ago, you're still a relatively young person, albeit a mature young person. How has refereeing allowed you, or did it, to mature as a person, a bit quicker than maybe if you just stuck with playing, or if you didn't have other roles going on?
Well, it definitely did help me mature pretty quickly. It really gave me a confidence boost, when that I actually do know the rules, and when players or coaches challenge me, I have the confidence to stand up for myself and say, actually, you're wrong in this situation. But it's also given me just other perspectives of the field and of the game, and seeing that, like, oh, that did affect the whole team, not just that one person. And I think the main thing that helped me mature was just learning how to speak to players and coaches and knowing what to say, how to say it, when to say it. Like knowing if a player comes up to me asking me a question, saying, that's not actually a question, you're just trying to make me mad. So I think it has given me a lot of confidence and matured me pretty quick.
Well, it sounds like you've developed a bit of an ability to read people as well, which is a pretty cool skill, especially if you're in a job interview or something that I'm sure you'll be doing a lot of down the line. But let's shift gears a little bit. Thanks, Chloe. Let's shift gears a little bit to Paul. So, Paul, you're like we said before, you're a guy who wears multiple hats in the rugby world. What is a typical week? COVID suspension aside, take us back to the spring of 2019. What does a typical week look like, when you're full on in season?
Yeah, so as a player and referee, it's always trying to find that balance. So, of course, here in BC, we got our games always on Saturdays. So you're looking at 2 training sessions throughout the week with the team. So that's Tuesday, Thursday nights. Your off nights, you're doing your own personal training and your own, social life and, your family balance. And then at the same time, trying to find a referee, trying to find a game that you can referee on a weekend is always on my mind. And it's really trying to find that balance where, you can make sure that, hey, you're playing the sport, you're committed in that sense, but at the same time, there's a demand for referees, and at the same time, there's a want to keep your name in there and keep your name in that pool ready to take the field. So it's definitely during the middle of the season, it's really about time management and making sure that you got your schedule figured out. And especially in BC, I think it's important to have a good relationship. If you're trying to referee and play, have a great relationship and an open relationship with your allocator, whoever that might be. If that means just, sending him an email, him or her an email once a week, or, being able to text them or talk to them on the phone and tell them about your struggles. Like, hey, you know what? Obviously later in the season, your body just starts breaking down. So, trying to manage that load of trying to play and referee, it can be, it can impact not only your the way you play the game, but also how you referee the game. So, during the middle of the season, you're looking at a very, very busy schedule, and it's definitely you need to be able to manage your time if you want to be successful in both ventures.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a lot, just hearing you speak about it. But no, it's true, and just I'm sure it challenges time management, but also you touched a little bit on the body and the physical side. So James, and for those of you who haven't realized, Paul and James are indeed identical twins. James, we were chatting a little bit about what your fitness is looking like now in a rugby suspension, but if you can imagine, going back to the spring of 2019, how challenging is it physically, especially as a player who is a mobile front row player, like has to be on his team, an extra back row player in the modern game. What's it like to keep that strength, size, mobility, and as well being able to move about the field and get to every breakdown as a referee?
It's definitely one kind of follows the other. I mean, it's one of those things that's like you said, as a modern hooker, you have to be like another back row, and just like I think every Prem's team in Canada, they like to play the 1-3-3-1 system. So you just find yourself always on the sideline with smaller, faster guys you're chasing around as it is. So during the season, I'm not much into lifting heavy and stuff, but I try to, especially as I'm getting older, is just do a lot of the fitness training with body weight stuff. So it kind of functionally it works quite well with refereeing. I might get caught on an island every now and then when I'm doing like the UBC sevens in the spring and stuff. But for the most part, the toughest thing is staying healthy as a rugby player, and then being able to referee following that, and then being able, like I've done games on Sunday mornings where it might just be U16 or U17 boys, and I'm sore from the day before playing in 10 degrees, pouring rain kind of thing. That's the challenging part I find. But fitness wise and stuff, I mean, if you want to be a high end player that doesn't get injured, you have to be in the gym at least 4 times a week. You have to do your cardio, and you have to stick to a regimen. And I think a lot of people would be surprised what high end referees and high end rugby players do. Their workouts are probably very similar. There might just be a difference in weights. I mean, of course, you don't have props and high end referees lifting the same weights, but it's the same functional workouts. And it's just like anything. Referees are athletes, just like the players they're refereeing, and I think they work perfectly in the same grouping. The challenging part is usually the game before or after you ref a game, and the body doesn't like that.
Well, and that's a whole different set of challenges, because you mentioned very briefly, the Vancouver Sevens Invitational, which is in the spring, and you've been a part of that regularly, and that's an off week, which is a different challenge, when you could be recovering your refereeing some decent sevens running up and down the field, but looking at it from a compact schedule, when you don't have the benefit of having a week off, often shifting from Saturday rugby to refereeing some junior grades on a Sunday has its own challenges to manage. But it's fascinating stuff, and just want to point out to everyone that the stereotype of the referee being a scrum half or a back 3 player, it's changed a lot. We have all 3 panelists on here are currently members of the forward pack, and all 3 have played in the front row. I know Paul's had to dabble in the front row when duty called. So you can definitely do both, and it's challenging, but I think there's, as you said, there's mutual benefit to both roles, and for those of you on that have joined us that are referees, there is benefit to strength training as well. It might look a bit different, but being able to smash a few weights a few times a week definitely does a lot for not only your power but your injury prevention. So just shifting gears a little bit here, folks, and getting more towards the on-field side. Just briefly, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what we refer to as the key areas of the game, it's something we throw out a lot in our discussions online and the pieces that we've been putting out on YouTube. But the big areas: breakdown, space, set piece, foul play, pretty self-explanatory. Within those key areas, there's summary focus points, and today we'll talk a little bit about the breakdown. First and foremost, the tackler, arriving players, entry on both teams, and the jackler pertaining to the arriving defender who is wanting to steal the ball, and the cleanout pertaining to the arriving support trying to eliminate or remove a threat and maintain possession. Specifically, we try to bridge gaps between players, referees, and coaches. The tackler, what it looks like for players and coaches, and what we try to communicate. And World Rugby has just put out an excellent resource on the breakdown decision-making guidelines. The tackler, the expectation that they're not in the way of the ball, and the law says they have to roll away, but in reality, they need to make sure they're not in the way of the ball. And what do referees do? The key skill is to observe. Is the tackler on the wrong side? And then they make a decision, which is the decide. And we ask the question, are they in the way? And if they're in the way, penalty kick is probably the option. If they're not in the way, play on. And it just makes the process a little bit more clear and contextualized. And the same can be said for arriving players. We won't go through each aspect, but that is the general idea and the big picture around what we refer to as key focus areas. But I would like to throw it over back to our panelists here. So Chloe, James, and Paul, obviously the breakdown is a massive area, and I just want to get your take as a group. What's the biggest challenge for you, given the breakdown is often where the game's won and lost. And apologies for our front row fraternity, but what is the biggest challenge for you as a player?
I mean, keeping your butt lower than your shoulders is probably the largest challenge for everyone.
That body position piece, eh? And
Yeah.
especially, well, you're quite tall for the position you play in, and compared to your predecessors. So that's what does that feel like in a game when under fatigue?
It's hard, yeah. It's definitely hard. I remember I also played field hockey when I was younger, and it's super hard. You get the same size stick as all the short girls, and you got to really work on your quads. So it's definitely a challenge for everyone.
It sounds like you've had some cross training there. That's fantastic, Chloe. How long did you play field hockey for?
Forever. I think I started in grade 2 and finished last year.
Oh wow! That would be, if my math is correct, 11 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Paul or James, anything to add? What's the most challenging thing for you as a player at the breakdown?
I think one thing that comes across the board, and sometimes I struggle with it, is just situational awareness, where whether a player comes and just kills the rock, slows the ball down, or goes for a pilfer and they're clearly off their feet. I mean, as a player, I usually try to take pride in not getting breakdown penalties, which sometimes you struggle with, but for the most part, referees definitely help with that. But I think situational awareness in BC is a big one, where I think consistently it's the same penalties and rocks and breaks and breakdowns that are getting called, and I think a lot of that comes down to the coaching and not so much the players understanding why they're getting called, and it kind of falls back to that because I've been on quite a few teams, rep teams, or just prem or Div 1 teams, and sometimes it's surprising the ignorance a lot of the players have, where they don't understand the laws in what's considered off your feet or what's considered not releasing, those kind of things. I've, like, on a Saturday, I think a lot of refs are taken off by that, and like as a player involved, sometimes I'm even like shocked at thinking, because you see it with emotional response when the call comes, how a player reacts, and it's like, well, any other game on TV, you would see that same call. So it's one of those.
And just to touch on what your last point is, it's such a complex environment, but you're also in a battle. The breakdown is effectively a contact point where there's a massive contest, and it's body position, like Chloe mentioned, it's possession, but it's also managing the referee and their role in the breakdown. So just shifting gears a little bit to your experience, given you have all this rich experience as players and have all been in that situation, what do you think refereeing does to help or hinder your play at the breakdown? So in other words, how does refereeing contribute in a positive or negative sense to either the breakdown in general or your experience personally?
Yeah, if I was just to jump in, I think the best referees are patient, and that's just allowing some time for the situation to develop. And it's amazing, if you give the players the opportunity, there's a lot on the field that they can sort out themselves, but in a legal way. So of course, you know what, you're not going to let someone do something dangerous or illegal that's gonna basically, you should be blowing the whistle for that. But at the same time, patience is important, especially at the breakdown. It's a very challenging part of the game. It can be very messy, especially in certain environments where, it's raining out, it's muddy. The point being is, if you're looking at penalizing every time there's a breakdown, it's going to be a really, really long day, not just trying to manage the players' expectations, but just getting the flow of the game going. So I think referees, the best referees are patient at the breakdowns, and they allow things to develop.
Yeah. And of course it's a balance, right? And going back to our how we articulate the key areas a little bit, the there are certain areas where sometimes patience can be an enemy, but it can be an ally. And obviously, we're not going to wait around too long when the tackler's in the way of the ball, because then something happens that someone may do something that they have to do that becomes illegal, and now we have a situation that's a lot more complex than it needed to be. But given your emphasis of patience, and I would agree, it's an excellent skill for refereeing. What are we looking for? What's a situation that you found yourself in shifting gears to being a referee? And I'll throw it around the table. I would like each of you to give your 2 cents. But when have you ever been in a situation where you've actually given yourself time and space to watch? What have you been waiting for? What have you been saying, I'm going to have a look here? Has that ever happened to you, Paul?
Yeah, so I would say, especially at the lower levels, there's a lot of times, for example, a tackler might make a tackle and it's like, okay, he's not rolling away. Is he going to roll away? And then all of a sudden, if you just give that extra second, someone from the team going forward is going to have the ability to clean him out. And it's just, again, I think it's giving players the opportunity to do their job. So, you look at a breakdown, everyone's got a role to play. So supporting players got a role to play on the defensive side and the offensive side. So again, I think that's where, if you just look at it a scenario like that, you give the players an opportunity to play, they will do positive things. So I just look at the breakdown of that. If you look at the breakdown, okay, as soon as the tackle's made, we want that ball played. A lot of times that's not realistic. So again, if you have a little patience, another player will come in, they'll do their job, and they'll allow that ball to play on.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul. Throw it over you to Chloe. What would you say is a moment where you might want to be more patient at the breakdown? What can you see yourself looking for as opposed to making a decision earlier?
Well, I completely agree with Paul, and I do find when I'm reffing some of the high school levels, sometimes the boys sevens, when there's a breakdown and nothing's really happening, everyone just looks at me as the ref, and I'm like, well, nothing's wrong, like just play on, sort it out yourself. So I think one step ahead of what Paul is teaching them to learn that they can figure it out on their own and then work it through instead of every second getting the ref to make a decision.
Yeah, and what I just want to build on that a little bit, Chloe. Communication is a really important piece as a referee, but often, and coaches who are also teachers would know this, we catch ourselves, having too much input, and maybe we're making decisions too early, or we're speaking too much, and the players around us will become conditioned instead of thinking in terms of a problem-solving approach to their competition. They're going to be looking for input from the referee. And those are where we have those moments. And I feel sometimes the answer in a grassroots level or very introductory level of the game, we feel we need to explain. But as you just said, having the ability just to let people figure it out. Do you find, if that's the situation especially in sevens, as you mentioned sevens, it's often an introductory tool at some levels of the game. Of course, we have the high performance sevens, which it looks completely different. But have you noticed in a game that behavior change when you have, you started off and players are looking at you and saying, what, please tell me an action. Have you noticed that if you've just had patience and waited and not said something or not blown your whistle, have you noticed a change as the game develops?
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a few players on every team that are like, okay, well, the ref's not doing anything, I'm going to just do something. And then the team usually tends to follow that player. They tend to be scrum halves, but I'm not saying anything about that.
They can be hookers who play sevens as well, right, Chloe?
Absolutely.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
that's great input. So having the courage just to observe, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't, and some people think that would be doing nothing, but you're not doing nothing. Your brain is working as I'm sure you've experienced. And Chloe, as a referee, yes, the eyeballs are moving and the body language is active, which is very, very good. And the presence is there for sure. James, over to you. What does patience at the breakdown look like in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all agree that at the grassroots or junior level, for the most part, we're managers of the game as well as referees. So there might be more communicating to them, telling them what to do. But I mean, at the men's, women's level, I mean, there's lots of situations like it could be slow ball, like 15 meters out, and there's a team picking and going, and it's just like okay, there might be a guy on top of the ball, but you recognize, you know what, he's probably going to roll away. The team's not trying to go quick here because they're just trying to pump it up down the field kind of thing. And it's just like, I've been in situations before where I think Chris has been reffing me and I'm screaming bloody murder because there's a guy on top of the ball, and you're like, well, like, what are you going to do? There's like, you're running by yourself into a set. Like as a ref, you can see the big picture where, you know, there's a set defense here. This player is not looking for quick ball to go by himself. And if he does, like, you're almost doing him a favor by not letting him lose the ball running into a set defense kind of thing.
Whereas, well, it's a great segue point there, James, and apologies for cutting you off. You know, you talked about that perspective is, you know, when we're refereeing and we're seeing everything and we're in a good position, we have lots of time and space. We have the ability to be patient, because if we're not, you know, if we're in too close or we're not at the right angle, you know, we don't have that opportunity to be patient. So yeah, it does take some work to get there. And, you know, you spoke as life as a player, sometimes you're focused on one thing and one task, to take Paul's words into it. But I do want to bring up a concept, James, that I would like you to start on. I have a question ready for you in my mind, but just for the group, I wanted to introduce the concept of rugby empathy versus rugby sympathy. And it's very, very relevant to the conversation we just had. You know, on the left, empathy, what does that look like? Well, it's the awareness of relevant facts in complex situations. You know, the best captains, the best players, and the best referees have that skill. On a sympathetic end of the spectrum, that might look like relying on feelings to navigate complex situations. And there might be a time or a place where that's beneficial for you in the role that you occupy. On the empathetic side, understanding what both teams want to achieve. And on the sympathetic side, that can translate to knowing what one team or one player wants to achieve because you might have been in their shoes before. Empathetic rugby people or referees also are aware of legal dominance in the broader spectrum. And sympathetic, that would mean you're focused on what's most impressive, or focused on, you know, one particular action, a big tackle, a big carry, despite what else might be going on outside of that. And the last piece, knowing who's under pressure and what they're going to do to cope, either legally or illegally. So that often the best captains and the best referees just have a sense of that. You know, as opposed to sympathetic, which is a human response, is we assume the best of people at times, and that could often be a good quality, but it can often be detrimental. We assume that a player or players can cope with the pressure in a legal fashion, and then they're going to be okay. So just as a quick introduction to our next segment here, over to you guys. So we'll start with you, James. What advice would you give to players, you know, thinking of refereeing, on how to approach player management? So, you know, put yourself back in your shoes when you were playing rugby and starting to dabble in the world of refereeing. What would you tell the players so that you can encourage them to be empathetic?
Well, the first thing I would say is, one, that referee who shows up on a Saturday to ref your game is not showing up to ruin your Saturday or your game. Where I think there's still people to this day that I've had conversations with believe that. Big eye opener for me as a player that got into referee, when, like, actually into the society where I was showing up to sessions, Wednesday night sessions, where we would be having these kind of discussions, and Chris or someone would be doing a presentation, it was very eye-opening to me. Was these refs, the high level refs, are working just as hard as the players are. Maybe not as much physically, where they're training Tuesday, Thursday nights, but they're always watching their Sport Lomo. Is it Sport Lomo? No, Coach Logic stuff. They're rewatching their games. They're doing notes on games. They're doing notes on games coming up. They're doing video sessions on the games of teams they're going to be reffing that following weekend. Like stuff like that really impressed me, and kind of, if anything, made me more appreciative of the refs. And then on a Saturday when I was captaining or a player, it was much easier for me to have conversations with that ref, either was in the clubhouse after the game or during the game. Whereas for years, I was also a lot younger and more immature in my early 20s, where it's just you're that player that thinks he knows everything he needs to know, where really there's this huge thing. Like Chris and I, to this day, will have conversations, and I'll learn some new law that I didn't even know existed, or a new angle about a law that I had no idea. Whereas that opened my eyes. Oh, maybe when that call got made in the game, that's what the ref was looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think a lot of players, they have that black and white perspective of the laws and the context of how they should be applied. Whereas, if you if you show up to a Wednesday session as a player, it's pretty eye-opening, the conversations and stuff, and how much pizza referees can eat.
And I like that you touched on it as well, because, as if you're a player starting to get involved in refereeing, you might start off just running around and blowing a whistle, but understanding that preparation and analysis piece that even in a small way has to come into it, even if you don't have that much time. The modern game is so fast and so complex that to serve the game well, even as beginning referees who are also playing, we have to have some element of that, and we see that, and it's evident in our online discussion forums, whether they be the Facebook group, or tools like Coach Logic, which we're lucky to have. We see some of our we see Paul and we see James involved in that, and I've tagged you, Chloe, in a few clips as well, and it's good to have that, even if we're only able to do it on a very small scale, because we're so busy. If you're playing rugby as well, it is an important part. I'll throw it over to you, Chloe. How has playing allowed you to develop some holistic rugby empathy as a referee?
Well, it definitely has. So when I think of rugby empathy, I think of the breakdown and specifically jackling. And as a front row player, I tend to find myself in the breakdown a lot. And when I can, I really like to jackal. It doesn't happen often, but it's
on
fun.
On your feet, yeah.
Of course, when my butt's low. But I can relate to it on a personal level, because I've been that person jackling, and I've been that person posting, and I've been that person running into the ruck trying to save it so it's not a turnover. And rarely, I sometimes find myself in that first receiver position where I've got a gap in the defense right in front of me, and I want the ball now. So as a referee, I have that in the back of my head as a player, being like, I understand everyone's situation right now, and I've been in those situations and I can relate to them.
No, that's fantastic. And just building on that a little bit, you said what it's like to be in both roles, whether you're having to make that clean out or be in a position to try and steal a ball. What have you seen, when you're putting your refereeing lens on here, have you seen a player who they might be a little bit late, or they might not, in your words, have their butt low enough? Have you ever caught yourself trying to see if they could succeed a little bit longer than you should?
Yes, I have. I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but definitely. Yeah, sometimes I see that person who's jackling and working so hard, and I have to remember, hey, they didn't actually release the tackler before they went for that ball, and I have to be stronger than myself and be like, you know what, that is actually illegal.
Yeah, and that's often and it's even for referees who aren't still playing, it's something that if you've experienced those things yourself, we often can move towards the side of sympathy, and that's a normal thing. But I guess if we're aware of it, we can move back to that objective view, because throwing it back to you, Chloe, you've also been the person having to clean that person out, and if you're arriving at a breakdown that you should win, and all of a sudden you're not winning it,
Mm-hmm.
have you ever, as a player, had that feeling before, where that I should have an easy job, now my job is so much harder because of the actions of that player that may or may not be legal? What does that feel like?
It's just so frustrating. Yeah, and sometimes that frustration can stay with me as a ref, thinking back on those moments. And yeah, you got to put it all aside. Remember you're human, but still put it kind of to the side.
That's really cool. Paul, I'll throw it over to you. How, you've been a captain for, especially nowadays, you're a captain more often than you're not, which could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the day. But how has your experience as a referee influenced you as a captain?
I would say it's really helped me become a better player and a better captain. Just the player side of refereeing is the same as, like, they both work hand in hand. But I would say what refereeing has allowed me to do in my experience with refereeing is seeing the bigger picture and being become more objective. And when I'm having discussions with the referee, being more objective and trying to take away the emotion out of it. Because again, all the better referees are able to kind of control their sympathy for players and look at a bigger picture, and making sure that if I'm a captain and I'm having a conversation with the referee about an issue I'm having on the field, it's as objective as possible, the facts are clear, and I'm just stating my concerns, or again, just trying to stay positive and trying to keep the emotions out of it. Now, of course, rugby is a high octane, heavily emotional game. That's not always possible, but it's making sure that I can try to control that. Because when I'm a referee, when I'm having to deal with and manage players that are really excited, and they're just upset because they're very emotional about, it seems like the game is going against them. It's, again, that's where I've seen it from that side as a referee, and it becomes more and more difficult. So if I look at it as a player now that I've become a referee, is when I'm a captain and I'm trying to lead my team, is definitely trying to be bigger picture about what I'm looking at, and when I'm having discussions, trying to be as objective as possible.
That's fantastic, Paul. It's quite a unique insight as well, because not everyone who is in your situations has had the you have to worry about being a player, being a leader on the field in the small areas, but also being the captain or the game manager, and you're managing the game as well as the referee, albeit with probably different goals in mind. But that's valuable stuff. Thanks to all three of you. So we'll just shift gears a little bit before we get to some questions, because there are some coming in, which is fantastic, and some really good ones. I just wanted to share with those of you who are here who maybe haven't dove into the world of refereeing yet, or maybe you're not involved as much as you would like to be. So here it's pretty easy to find if you know where to find it, so to speak. bcrugby.com, there's a become a referee page. And during the rugby suspension, because I will remind everyone, we are under rugby suspension until Rugby Canada and our provincial health authorities give us the green light, but we can be doing some stuff in the meantime. At the Become a Referee page here in BC, there's some online certificates. The practical course components will be announced obviously at a later date once we are aware of our return to play. The certificates are there available for you can download them after you've completed them and create your World Rugby passport portfolio if you don't already have one. So the information is all there. The referee resource page is also really good, even if you haven't started. There's a bunch of videos and some exercises that you can do to stay up to date and stay sharp. And of course, as we mentioned before, our BC Rugby Referees Facebook group, and BC Rugby Education on YouTube and Facebook as well. On Instagram, BC Rugby Referees. Over in Alberta, rugbyalberta.com will take you to a page, and there's some good how to get started bits and pieces from the Edmonton and Calgary areas. SAS Rugby, they've got a very similar page to get you started on some online learning before getting into a course environment and getting out on the field at saskrugby.com. The Rugby Manitoba Union also has a similar page, rugbymb.ca. But Rugby Ontario at rugbyontario.com has an excellent Becoming a Referee page as well. And Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia, They have an excellent Facebook group there run by the Referee Society's president, James Alder, and then New Brunswick, rugbynb.ca. There are some how to get started bits and pieces, as well as PEI and Newfoundland. We will look at some of our group questions. So there was an interesting question coming in from Dave Williams, who is the allocator to the BC Premier League, as well as all levels in the Lower Mainland. And his question is, how do you adjust your patience to the level of rugby? And he's talking about patience at the breakdown. What might that look like in Division 3 compared to Division 1 or Prems or high performance rugby? How would you adjust that, so to speak?
Well, one thing that I have found is it's definitely something you should do before the game. It's something that you should anticipate. And I hear it a lot as a player from coaches, but it also works with refereeing, is visualization and fully knowing and understanding what level of rugby you're going into, whether it's middle school rugby like I did when I was starting, or being the main referee for some women's games or ARing Prems games. You got to know what you're going into.
So what does that look like? When would you do that? And what are some strategies that you've adopted to allow yourself to visualize, what you might see?
Well, I usually do it the night before, when you're lying in bed. And one thing I do is I reflect on past games and things that maybe you should have done instead. Like, oh, I probably should have let that rut go a little bit longer, considering these kids are kind of new and they need to do it on their own. Or if it's more of an intense game, you're like, yeah, I should have just kind of shut that off right before it escalated.
Fantastic. And as a player, would that process be similar?
Yeah, definitely. A little bit different in more of like you being that person that should be more patient instead of watching the player. But yeah, I use the same thing. Visualization really helps for me.
And Paul, James, same question. What would that look like from a Division 1 to Division 3? How would you adjust based on the I guess the level of rugby and the environment that you're about to experience?
I'll go first, James. Thank you. I think it all just comes back to empathy and actually before empathy even, it's just, it's setting yourself up for success, and obviously getting allocated to a game. You should do your background on that game that you've been allocated to, whether it be Division 3, Division 1, women's, men's, or juniors. If you can access standings, and if these two teams have played each other in the past and what that looks like. So again, is before the game, before the first whistle even happens, just setting yourself up to, okay, what am I coming into? What's this game going to look like? And then again, the good referees will adjust, their empathy and go in that game more objectively, being like, what, I got allocated to a game where, number 1 is playing number 12 in the standings. So again, looking at the big picture, okay, what's my goal going to be? Making sure that one team doesn't end up with 60 points and the other team ends up with 4 red cards, kind of thing. So again, I think it's looking at the games in the big picture, setting yourself up for success, and then while the game's happening, just going into it in an objective way and trying to find what's the best way to get through those games.
Great, thanks, Paul. What would that look like for you, James?
Yeah, it's very similar to Paul's. I mean, at that point, a funny story would be like my first Div 1 men's game was actually my old club that my brother plays for, Surrey. And it was just one of those things, of course, like BC Rugby was kind of had their hands tied behind their back because referees were sick or something. So like the only appropriate, I guess, experienced ref that could do it was myself, which goes against a lot of unwritten laws, like having the ex-captain of a club come and ref. But funny enough, I had to travel to the island to go do that game. But it was the perspective of where I went from doing like Div 2, Div 3 men's games to, okay, it was a first division game with Surrey, one of the top teams, against an island Division One team. So you don't know what you're going to get, kind of week in, week out. And it was where objectively I try to be as clean as possible, but finding myself tougher on my own brother's team, which sometimes I even had to like turn it down a bit and be like, okay, you got to stop being a dick to your brother to prove to the other team that you're not trying to turn the tide for no reason.
Well, I
But
guess
I mean,
it's battling that perspective,
yeah,
perception of you don't want to be perceived as biased in any way, shape, or
yeah.
form.
But I mean, and
Yeah.
going back to perspective, like I think a lot of refs who've done prem reserves, Div 1 down to Div 3 is the higher the level of the game, the easier it is to manage, where you can take some of those tools you'd use in Div 3 game of being super vocal, of being a little more patient at the breakdowns, being a little more sympathetic to certain situations rather than empathetic to the game, or seeing a team getting blown. You get more of the blowouts in Div 3 when you have like a Squamish versus I don't know, a team struggling with numbers, or a one team club playing a club with three teams kind of thing.
Mm-hmm,
And it's just one of those things where, okay, a team's getting blown out here. You know what? There's 5 minutes left. Div 3. You know what? These guys want to shower and have beers, kind of thing. Where you know what? Suddenly it's a Division 1 game, and it's tied with 5 minutes left. And it's one of those things where, just as a player, preparing during the week for the game is what's going to make that part easy and those decisions easy.
And going back to you, Paul, reflecting on that situation, because I was actually speaking to a friend about it today when we were chatting about some referee bits. But that game, a Saturday afternoon, long journey from Surrey in the Fraser Valley to Vancouver Island in Port Alberni. What were some of the feelings, thoughts running through your mind, knowing that, oh geez, my former teammate, my biological twin brother is going to be refereeing the game, and I'm going to be the captain. How did you approach that task?
Yeah, there was a lot of dynamics at play that day, and I don't think you could script anything more exciting than that. So, but yeah, no, it was a challenge. What I'll say, as a player and a captain, it was a challenge. You're already going into a game. You're already focused on playing against another team, and now all of a sudden here's another dynamic for you. And I think that's the biggest thing as a referee is, you got to expect the unexpected, and all of a sudden some dynamics to come into a game that even you might not know about when you're going to the game, where, there already might be this perception about you before you even show up and I'm sure all referees have faced that before, where, there's been whispers about, oh, did you hear what this guy did last week and stuff? So again, it's, putting those perceptions to the side. And again, just understanding as a referee, or if you're a captain or a player, just doing your role on the field, and being as objective as possible. And the best referees will do that on a day. As you said before, the best captains can do that on a day, and the best players can do that on that same day. So again, it's, if there's tons of dynamics going into a game like rugby, and it's just understanding that those should be all pushed to the side, and all those perceptions about you can be pushed to the side just by your actions.
Well, and you mentioned as well, sometimes there's a lot of cross connections in rugby, sometimes in exceptional certain situations like that day, at the Port Alberni Black Sheep Rugby Club, but also in other ways that happen almost more frequently, but are almost as just as difficult. And so, Chloe, I want to throw it over to you as someone who, we're all from, rugby is a small community around the world, but growing up in the south of Vancouver Island, in Oak Bay, having all these roles, referee, assistant referee, player, captain, teammate, have you ever navigated some difficult situations, either playing against former teammates or refereeing former teammates, or potentially playing against someone, in a sevens tournament that the week before was your teammate? How would you navigate those types of situations, especially given the fact that you're under the age of 20?
Yeah, so I have had some experiences where I've refereed some of my ex-coaches, and it was a little hard and nervous.
Yeah,
I
we won't name names, but maybe when we go offline, we can share a few laugh. But
that was definitely hard and definitely an experience I'm going to remember for a while. I actually had two coaches who coached me, an assistant and a main, who coached me on a team that were playing on different teams, and I was refereeing the game, and it was hard. Luckily, one was a forward and one was a fullback, so they never really met. But
there was no direct interaction. But
exactly.
did you have any moments, talking about communication a little bit before, in downtime, when the ball's out of play, we're waiting for a sub to come on the field, or someone's, tying their shoe. Were there moments where they came over and said hello, or were there moments where they came over and said, "Oh, did you see what that person was doing 5 minutes ago?" Or...
Well, I've never really had any negative experiences with that, but I do joke around a bit. I enjoy talking to my coaches and stuff, and one time I actually refereed a national team player, and I remember, I don't think it was her, but maybe someone that she talked to like called me out, was like, "Oh, that was so forward," and I was just like, "Oh my God, she's so much better at playing rugby than me. What do I do?" So definitely navigating that, and then I think that goes back to the rugby empathy and rugby sympathy, and having to be like, "No, just a normal player. Don't even think about it."
Yeah, that would be a tough situation to be in, but no, that's a really cool story, and that is the fortunate reality, I think, in many environments where we do get to see each other in different roles, and get to know each other. And I think, without becoming entrapping ourselves in over familiarity on the day, building those relationships off the field, as we've all touched on throughout the evening, is massive. And it may encourage others who may not be doing it to do it a little bit more, and not, it goes beyond just taking a course and saying you're certified, but regularly stepping on the field with a whistle, like the three of you have been doing, without giving up your playing career, is so valuable, because it just breaks down so many barriers, and I think it does wonders, for the development and the growth of our game in the long term. So we're just about out of time. I'm going to fire some rapid ones at you, each of you, and I'll start with James this time. What advice would you give referees to better improve their knowledge and their empathy for the game?
For referees to improve, have those conversations after games in the clubhouse. I think there's been lots of times where, I know all the referees that do my games, like on a personal level, because I work with them and stuff as a referee. But having those constructive conversations after the game does nothing but help the players get a perspective and the referees see it. And I think a lot, if not all, the refs in the Prems League do that, and they're willing to have those conversations after the game. And reach out to the clubs too. We have at Burnaby, weekly, we'll have a few of the Prem refs come by to our training sessions and work with the players. The players love it, because they're finally getting to see the refs in a non-game situation, and the refs are seeing the players in more of a training context, and it does nothing but helps build that bridge. And for the players themselves, I think every captain of a first, second, or a club or a Prem team, like every captain should at least do the level 1 course and grab a whistle themselves, because same perspective. It's going to do nothing but make Saturdays more easy as a captain and a manager of your players.
That's really good, James. Thanks for that insight. it is important. And again, I think just doing what you do might encourage that as well through the levels, because it can be, at one level, especially in a high performance environment, you're working as a team of three, and the referee has some allies, so to speak. So it's easier to have those conversations. But I think the work that you're all doing just by going out and refereeing may make it a little less intimidating for someone who's, in a lower, for lack of a better term, in a grassroots environment where they're working by themselves and they're working with players who maybe don't have the empathy for the referee that as much as a different level of rugby. This one's for you, Paul. What advice would you give to coaches and players on how to improve their interactions with referees?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, try to throw as many perceptions out the door that you might have about someone, and try to create that partnership, because it's not just the team and the players and the coach that want to be successful during a game. It's the referee. And I would say, it starts with when that referee shows up at your field, welcoming him, sparking up a conversation if they're open to it, and just trying to form that partnership and that relationship. And I would say a bigger side of the relationship that happens is after the game, let it breathe. Don't get in the referee's face if things aren't going your way. Let it breathe. You know what? If there's going to be a discussion, bring it back to the clubhouse or take it offline, kind of thing. So again, I think it just starts with the relationship that you can form with a lot of the referees, between the coaches and the players, and that's the captain too. Try to form that partnership, and then next thing you know, that partnership will turn into a strong relationship where, both parties can be successful on a game day if you allow that partnership to happen.
Well, that's wonderful. Thanks, Paul. It's so important, and it's easy for us to talk about, very difficult to do in practice. But like anything, if we keep trying to improve in that aspect of building those healthy relationships, I think we'll get to a better place than when we started. Chloe, again, not to be ageist, because again, you, at the age you are, you have some life skills and some insights that many would be envious of at a far more advanced age. But what would you say to your friends and other folks your age to encourage them to get involved and try a bit of refereeing on the field?
Well, I have a story really quick, I promise. And so last year I was playing with my high school team, and we were playing in this tournament, and it was sevens, and our kicker kicked, but it didn't quite go to the 10. So the referee called a penalty kick. And no one on my team knew what that meant. Like, he was holding his arm up like this and nobody knew. So I was like, just like a penalty, just don't kick it out of bounds or else it's theirs. And the referee was Kevin Smith, who really was a mentor to me in refereeing. And he was like, yep, listen to the ref over there. And I just felt on cloud nine. Like, I was just so happy that I just had that knowledge, and the team just respected me that little bit more, because I wasn't a dick about it or anything. I just was nice, and I was like, let's go. So it gives you confidence, and it makes you feel good to have that level.
That's fantastic. And I think you don't necessarily have that knowledge and the ability to apply it like you did in a pressurized environment without actually having done it. We have a lot of people that say, I'll take a referee course because I want to learn the laws. Well, the laws, exams and the pre-level 1 and Rugby Ready and everything that World Rugby offers online is all there. So if that's the purpose of someone's wanting to get involved, don't just go do it online. The reason to get involved in refereeing, like you said, to be able to do those, has to be centered around the idea of being on the field. And I think your experience on the field, and the reps you get allows you to pull those, even though they're quite basic bits of law knowledge, it allows you to pull them out under pressure and at the right time, so that I'm sure you felt really good, but your teammates were probably like, I'm really glad we didn't give them back the ball. So
yeah, and like seeing a breakdown and seeing a penalty, I'm like, all right, they're gonna call that. I might as well just get back 10 right now. It's just that extra level, and it makes you feel good.
I always help the referees on Saturdays.
Yeah, there's again, going back to sympathy versus empathy, you know, there's a lot that can be said, and again, we can keep having these conversations for you know, a long period of time. I really enjoy you know, speaking to each of you as individuals, but this was the first time that I've gotten together with the three of you as one group, and it's amazing to see the common threads in your life experiences, even though you come from such different backgrounds and such different walks of life, except for James and Paul, of course, but they have had different experiences
The same
and have
womb.
different stories as well. But anyway, thanks so much, everyone. Just one final reminder before we do have another session coming up, and our presenter, hopefully school reports permitting, will be able to join us. That's Bruce Kuklinski, a former international referee and current World Rugby Discipline citing commissioner. It's been a long day, but and he'll be looking at foul play and the discipline process both on and off the field. And the Rugby Canada Ref Report, great piece that Nathan Abdulnoor from Rugby Canada has been putting together. They're in the process of confirming their next session with a referee who formerly an Ontario referee who now resides in New Zealand and just made the national squad. So hopefully some good stories to be shared there. So again, on behalf of BC Rugby, and again, Chloe Hill-Huse, Paul Kelly, James Kelly, thank you very much, and have a good night and stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much.